This Netpol report, In Our Millions, really brings together all kinds of knowledge and understanding about how policing of Palestine protests has happened. And if you were in the streets or in front of factories or in the banks or in the high streets or lobbying your MP to stop this genocide, you should read this report, because you'll see something of your own experience and understand what the police did to try and stop us. I think people understand that we're living through a cataclysmic moment in history. This is not the first genocide, and sadly it probably won't be the last, but it is one which has been constantly documented by those who are victims of this genocidal violence. And it's happened as part of the long project of ethnic cleansing and apartheid undertaken by the Israeli state. Now, the global agitation around that has given rise to a scale and variety and consistency of protests that I don't think, well, we haven't seen it in my lifetime, and probably we haven't really seen it in the West since the 1960s. On the one hand, it's a set of historical events that people rightly all around the world feel absolutely part of. You know, not apart from it. It's not just on our screens, it feels like it's part of us. For many of our friends, colleagues, comrades, it is part of them. Every Palestinian I know has family connections somewhere, either in Gaza or the West Bank, who's been facing this violence. And alongside that, there's this enormous resurgence of protest activity. And that's really heartening. But of course, alongside that, we've seen a real renewal of state repression of protest in big and small ways, sometimes in truly bizarre ways. And this report is a way of trying to capture this moment, partly so that we as a movement can remember what this changeover moment was like. One thing that is scary and notable about this phase of policing of protests is how overt political interference in the policing has been. That we've had this constant stream of political representatives and media pundits really egging the police on, saying, what are you doing? Why are you allowing these people to protest? This isn't allowed. And that has very clearly shaped the police response. The police have done things and filmed themselves as if to answer that constant political and media lobbying for them to be harder on protesters. That's one thing that I think we need to learn from and understand how it happened. There's also been an escalation of forms of policing that we know all too well. British police are always racist. They're racist in a slightly different, particular way around the issue of Palestine. In the evidence we've collected, there's all kinds of different actors saying it's pretty clear that there's racial profiling going on, very much around the young, very much around those seen as Muslim, those seen as Arab, those seen as Palestinian even though they don't name Palestinianness. And that some of that is about policing just symbols of Palestinian identity, that picking people up for face covering, but most of all if they're wearing a keffiyeh, all kinds of attempts to stop people saying particular slogans without a clear basis of why that would be unlawful. British police are not unaccustomed to disrupting or stopping protest, but there have been some quite odd events happened around this set of protests. Certainly we've seen inconsistency amongst police forces who are doing the same, policing the same protest, contradictory statements, quite a lot of odd behaviour around how the police officers try and corral the crowd into different spaces. Various witnesses talked about how on one side people from the police force were saying, oh, you can't pass, you're kettled, and on the other people are saying, oh, you have to disperse immediately. People are trying to disperse, but then it's other police officers preventing them from dispersing. There's a kind of element of ad hocness and confusion about a lot of the policing. That was seen most of all in the attempt to say that these are hate marches. The police were clearly very unclear about what their instructions were there. We've seen people arrested for putting up a sticker or having a placard. Sometimes a placard not even with writing on it, just with a picture. It's not at all clear that the police have any consensus amongst themselves of why they're making those arrests or how they might be justified, or even in whose interest they are. One testimony told a quite detailed story from a person who'd been attending a number of protests with a quite carefully made, handmade placard that outlined some key moments of ethnic cleansing and genocide by the Third Reich and some key moments of ethnic cleansing and genocide by the Israeli state. And in order to summarise that, they'd put a date, what had happened, and then for Third Reich crimes, a swastika, and then for Israeli war crimes, an Israeli flag. When they first attended a protest in October with this placard, they had a conversation with a police officer. The person explained that this is a kind of summary of 20th century and early 21st century ethnic cleansing. And the police officer said, oh yeah, that all sounds fine. Then they took it to some other protests and went and had another conversation with some other police officers who then asked what it's about and said, oh yeah, that seems fine. Another group of officers came and said, oh look, this is offensive. You can't have this. And the police officers say, oh, well, what's offensive is that you've got swastikas on it. But if you rub out the swastikas, then it will be all right. So they lend the person a pen to rub out the swastikas. But the pen they've got is not good enough to make the swastikas invisible. And so they arrest this person. But when they release their police press release, they say, oh, we have clamped down on the use of Nazi symbols. So there's a strong implication there that this was a Nazi sympathiser. Another famous case, what did make the media, so people probably know it, a slightly older activist in Wales who had been consistently lobbying their MP. Every week when they'd done a Palestine solidarity stall, they'd pinned with drawing pins on the MP's surgery door and the numbers of how many Palestinians had been killed then, to show a running toll. That person's house was raided in the early morning on an allegation of criminal damage on the basis of putting drawing pins in that door. And the police officers ran around the house saying, what we're looking for as evidence is drawing pins. Now this kind of thing can only be understood as outright intimidation designed to stop people from protesting. We're also hearing accounts of very excessive numbers of police at quite small protests and protests outside London, very overt surveillance of protesters, quite kind of bullying forms of taking protesters' photos, getting up in people's faces, including legal observers' faces, with cameras by the police. Arrests that seem designed to scare people, like picking up very, very young people, children, families, people in pushchairs. And all of this seems designed to make us all too afraid to keep on protesting against a genocide taking place in front of our eyes. I think it isn't working. I think we've seen week in, week out, people coming out on the streets in their neighbourhoods, in big cities, lobbying MPs, calling for divestment, calling for sanctions. We're seeing students camping out on their campuses. We're seeing old people sitting in Barclays. It's not working. It's becoming a very heightened kind of conflict between a state which says there are no terms on which we would accept these protests as legitimate and your right to undertake, and a mass public who are saying, how can we sit still when this kind of carnage is going on? There's no sign of energy receding from this solidarity movement. I think in many ways we're just beginning. What has been revealed about the extreme violence of the Israeli state and how that extreme violence is linked to imperial violence all across the world, including police violence in the United States and in this country, that can't be packed away again easily. People understand now that their freedom is intrinsically tied up with the freedom of Palestinians. And you can't stop that. You can't make people forget that or unlearn it. I think that the political class in Britain and in the United States truly believed for a long time this would just blow over. You can hear Keir Starmer thinking, oh, doesn't matter what I say now, I'll still be Prime Minister, people forget. You can see Biden kind of carrying on as if everything's business as usual. You can even hear a kind of liberal Zionist commentary kind of acting like, oh, this has been a bit bad, but it's just Netanyahu. But I don't think that's how the world feels. People in this country and across America and Europe have seen how deeply their own state machineries are tied to the interests of Israel and the interests of empire everywhere. And as part of those interests, don't give two peas about any of us. Don't care about the welfare of young people or children or old people, or whether there's housing or health, as long as there's some kind of big military machine owning the world. But it also can't be put back because of the global south. Sometimes in Britain we can forget that the rest of the world can see. But the rest of the world can see, and it can see what the West has been doing. It's seen what they've done in the United Nations, it's seen what they've done in the ICJ, and that slowly in other parts of the world, people are acting like Britain and America and those old imperial centres are just irrelevant. That people want to remake a world with a free Palestine and a free everyone. And some of the people who think they're kings of the castle right now might find that their time is running out.